So here's a question I don't think I've ever been asked before, which is what was the labor and delivery and the whole birth experience like for me? There's a good reason nobody's asked me that before, and that is because my experience obviously significantly less important than my wife's experience. But I was in the room, and so if you are also in the room, then here's what it's like. The answer is that it's largely pretty tedious, to be honest with you. It's like a lot of time. It's just sitting around. A lot of time will pass, and not a lot will happen. And so it weirdly just becomes kind of like normal. You get into the hospital, it's a whole thing, and then once you're in there, you're just kind of like hanging around, and there's not a lot to do. And so hours would pass, or we're just like on our phones or talking or watching something or whatever. And I actually, so my attitude, for what it's worth, is not just like tedious. My attitude is I'm at your service. And that is primarily, of course, my wife, but I'm also at anybody else's service. So any hospital person who needs me to do something or fill something out or get something or whatever, like I'm at everybody's service. Our parents are checking in constantly. I'm at their service. I'm just at everybody's service. So I ran out and got food a number of times. My wife at one point during our first kid at the whatever the hospital stay for our first kid, she was on deadline. She's a journalist, and so she took a nap at some point, and I did an edit on a story that she was working on. We're just kind of there, and then when it's go time, then everything gets crazy. Like all of a sudden, it's the weirdest thing. It's like hours and hours of nothing, and then craziness, and like everybody's in, and like suddenly you're actually seeing, you're like in the scene that you see in the movies where there's like a bunch of nurses and everyone's scrambling around, and somebody's screaming like push. Somebody's counting like 5, 4, and that is crazy. And then you have a decision to make. As the person who is not giving birth. And that decision, which should be made with the person who's giving birth, is like, where do you go? What are you doing? In our case, we both agreed that we had no interest in having me be at the point of action, so to speak. I was not down there with the nurses. No interest in that at all. Instead, I kind of stayed up by my wife's head, and it's like a blur. I can't remember exactly I think I basically was trying to be encouraging, but also realizing that I'm pretty useless at this point. And then when the baby actually arrived, baby's pulled out and brought up, and I could see this baby just sort of emerge, even despite my perspective. And I just remember the first time I just started screaming, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. That's what I was screaming. And then, and then basically you're like, then the tornado is done, and the baby's taken out of the room for a few minutes to go get weighed and whatever is happening. There's tests that are done, and then you're just kind of back to being at your service. You're just going getting stuff. I remember I think I ran home at 2 a.m. to get some stuff that we had left back at the apartment. That's what it is. You're just kind of, you're there to be helpful and to experience it, and then you will forget it all because it turns out that although you're prepping and when the pregnancy is happening, you're prepping for this moment, and it goes on forever, and then you get there, and then it's a kind of chaotic scene, and then it's over, and then the rest of parenting has no relationship at all to that experience, and so in a way it just becomes this kind of weird blip. But anyway, be helpful. That is my advice.